As promised, this is the theological side of days 8 and 9 of Chad Daybell's trial. You asked, here are the answers to more of your Mormon questions about the Chad Daybell trial. If you're new here, I am Annette Lyon, USA Today best-selling author of the suspense novel Just One More and a whole lot of other books, in addition to being a true crime junkie and woman of faith. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but as always, I do not speak for the church. I don't speak for all members. This is I'm expressing my opinions and explanations, my understandings of church policy procedure, and all of that good stuff, as in an effort to offer clarity to this trial in particular. I've also talked about Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand and that complete dumpster fire and how they've twisted beliefs. I am not here to defend or excuse or try to convert anybody. I'm adding context and clarity, especially for those things that could be considered dog whistles in a sense, if you know what you're looking for, and some references that may fly right over the heads of a lot of people who just, if you're not part of the church and don't know, then you don't know. So trying to add some clarity and insight into some of that. That's what we're doing here. They had one comment a few days ago who said Chad and Lori Daybell were not strictly speaking LDS. They had roots in LDS, but their shtick was custom crafted to make them high religious personages, aka important. Exactly, and that's what I'm doing here, is to show where they deviated. They put themselves forward as very righteous LDS people, but they absolutely, no, they were so off the mark and off into a ditch. We know for sure that Chad has been excommunicated. I would be shocked if Lori has not. That's not something the church makes public. So if somebody else finds out about an excommunication and they make it public, then that's how we know. That's also how we found out that Tim Ballard has been excommunicated, but the church won't confirm or deny things like that. And they happen on the local level too. That's in some ways a problem because generally speaking, Salt Lake, meaning, you know, the highest leaders, think Vatican kind of thing, they're the ones who I think need to step in some of these cases, but excommunications are done on the local level, for better or worse. So so much more to talk about on that, but we'll stick to some of the theology that I have promised. Another viewer, Red Rose, says, thank you for explaining about Korihor. That was my last religious one. I had no idea who or what they were talking about. So thank you. That again, that is what I'm doing. That's the entire point of this channel at this point, following the Chad Daybell trial in particular, because there is so much theology and church belief, policy, scripture mixed in with a lot of crazy, off the wall, sociopathic crap. I've seen some people even say things like, oh, if it weren't for the Mormon church, this wouldn't have happened. And maybe not. I think Chad and Lori were the kind of people that if they had been born and raised instead, say in Southern Baptist something or Lutheran something, if they were given a spiritual framework to twist and turn and play with, stick it on its head and claim that they were suddenly prophets, they still would have done it. I don't think the framework is to blame. These are sociopaths and narcissists. So there you go. One of the first questions that I wanted to bring up, if I can find it. This was someone who said, pardon my French, I'm quoting them. It says, how in the hell did Chad and Lori get this so wrong? Meaning the 144,000. And they go into how the common Christianity belief is that it refers to male virgins who have not been with women. Nowhere is it ever mentioned. They say that there is a, quote, headman/wife team who have to, quote, usher in the 144,000. So I have to wonder, what the hell is Mormonism teaching these people? As I've said before, in my 50 years, most of this crap has never been, I've never heard this stuff. I have never heard anyone over the pulpit talking about the 144,000. It's really, honestly, it's something that might come up when in Sunday school during the year that we're studying the New Testament and the Book of Revelation comes up. That's it. And for those who don't know, we've got four primary books of Scripture, and that's the Bible split into Old Testament and then New Testament, and then you've got Book of Mormon, and then everything else is just Doctrine and Covenants and other little things. But so some of the way some of the lessons at Sunday school kinds of things they've changed over the last few years to be more topical. But it used to be that you would rotate through, one year everybody across the church in Sunday school would talk about the Old Testament. Then the next year it would be everybody is studying the New Testament. And then the next year everybody is studying Book of Mormon. And then, so that's what your lessons would be about on Sundays. Manuals would have that. The only reference, I searched the church's website, which granted is not exhaustive, but there is a crap ton on there that especially goes back to like General Conference. Okay, I'm backing up on that. General Conference is a twice yearly worldwide conference event where all of the top 15 leaders and other leaders speak, and they're recorded and they're printed, and it's every 6 months. It's a Saturday and a Sunday, 5 sessions that are about 2 hours each. Tabernacle Choir sings at a couple of them, and they'll bring in others. It's a big thing. We don't go to church on those Sundays because we're home in our pajamas watching General Conference. If it's considered to be policy, doctrine, procedure, whatever, you will have heard about it a lot in General Conference. And I could not find any mention of 144,000 in any of the talks that are currently on the church website. And they go back at 50 years, approximately. So in 50 years in General Conference, for sure, not a single mention. Only references I could find on the church website were from old manuals and just referencing the Book of Revelation, and then one part of the Doctrine and Covenants, and I'll quote that in a moment. But it's just not something we talk about. It's not part of our doctrine. It's not part of. It's a thing, I guess, but no one. It's not a central tenet by any stretch of the imagination. I saw somewhere else. I did some digging. Who said that they hadn't been mentioned in General Conference in over 100 years. So I only have that website's word, and I don't even know what that last reference was, or who said it, or what the context was. Here is what little I could find about it. It shows up, of course, in the New Testament in the Book of Revelation, and for across the board, very commonly we'll put an S at the end of that, as in Revelations. It's actually Revelation, singular. In chapter 7, verses 4 through 8, it refers to the 144,000. According to Joseph Smith, and again, please, no attacks on him or anything else. I'm explaining, I'm not evangelizing or defending or anything else. I'm just information, okay? According to Joseph Smith, the 144,000 is the number of representatives, possibly priesthood holders, which would imply men, not necessarily virgins, probably not, in fact, because we don't believe that virginity is the highest form of anything, because family is kind of, people say there's family worship, which I can't completely disagree with, but the family is often considered the central point of a lot of doctrines. So virginity is not, let's just put it that way. This is why we have lots of children and blah blah. These would be people who would be ordained to, quote, assist others in their quest for exaltation, and that it is not, as some people believe, the total number of people who will be exalted. So the idea that there would be two people, a husband and a wife, given the mission to gather 144,000 righteous people into camps has zero basis in our belief system. There's nothing anywhere to base that on. I don't know where they got that from, beyond their own narcissistic brains. On the stand, David Warwick actually mentions how he did not feel good about that idea, and he told Chad specifically, I don't think this is right, because if there is such a call, a big, huge mission to fulfill as the leaders gathering 144,000, whatever, that call and mission would come from the prophet. You would not take it upon yourself. And that goes back to, as I've mentioned in many videos, our concept of stewardship, that you get revelation for the things and people within your realm of responsibility and not outside of that. So something that is a worldwide mission or something of that big of a scope would not be in Joe members' domain. They have no right to be receiving revelation on any of that. Just like I have no right to receive revelation for my next door neighbor or their children, only for my household, my children. I don't know why they decided to just go off on that, except that the book of Revelation is known for being about the end times. I've heard that some biblical scholars, and I'm not talking LDS, but just biblical scholars in general, view the book of Revelation as post-apocalyptic literature, not actual revelation and prophecy. I don't know. People who enjoy the whole prepper mentality and preparing for the end of the world and Christ is coming and it's imminent, they tend to focus on the book of Revelation, it seems to me. And all the calamities and blah, blah, blah. And they forget that Jesus said, love everyone and serve the poor. And they just kind of ignore all of that part. So, in my opinion, is the book of Revelation? I don't know. But shouldn't be our focus. Our focus should be caring for the poor and the needy and living Christ-like lives. One more way that Chad and Lori were just completely out of their mind. Another question was the Church of the Firstborn. People were saying, well, that does show up in your Doctrine and Covenants. The Church of the Firstborn is used to describe a group of people in the next life who will be exalted. If you are going to be exalted in the next life, then those people get that label of being members of the Church of the Firstborn. Firstborn meaning Christ. So it's not something that would be on this earth anyway. Chad decided to call his own little church the Church of the Firstborn. But that's it. This is a question I very much appreciated from Janet M. Novik. 5510 was her handle. And I appreciate how she phrased this. I would like to respectfully ask a question. Thank you. In my very limited understanding, LDS marriages sealed in the temple are still married in the afterlife. If that's true, what does that mean for a wife like Tammy? I'm respectfully asking and curious. So, again, very, very good question. First off, yes, we believe that a sealed marriage is for time and for all eternity, assuming both parties remain faithful and keep their covenants, that marriages can continue to the next life. It does get a little tricky, though. Let's talk about it. Many countries, even today, do not recognize a temple wedding as a valid civil ceremony. So people who often live outside of the U.S. They get married civilly, however, wherever, and then they are encouraged to get sealed as soon as they can. So some couples will get married civilly in, say, Germany, wherever, and then they will, on their honeymoon perhaps, visit the temple and be sealed. There used to be a policy that was instituted in the early 1900s when the bulk of the church was in Utah, and the leaders felt that the weddings were getting too big and ostentatious, and the seriousness of the covenants of a sealing were getting lost on people. And so they put a policy in place that, again, this affected maybe 90-something% of membership, because it was right here in Utah where almost everybody was a member, where if you got married civilly first, then you had to wait a year to be sealed. So that the idea was to encourage people to be sealed and married at the same time. And so that policy went for many, many years. It went for about a century. And as you started getting, into the 90s and then once into the 2000s, the church expanded and expanded. And now there are more people living outside of the U.S. who are members than within. Forget Utah. I mean, the church has expanded and gotten so much bigger. So having this policy based on the United States, it became hugely problematic when you had part member families, and of course only, as they say, card carrying members who have a temple recommend could attend, say, a child's wedding. And a lot of families were hurt, and understandably so. I know of one woman, I remember reading her blog, faithful member, all the good men on a mission, all the stuff. And for her, so her father was not a member, and she was the youngest of several sisters. And she had seen him quietly supporting his children and his daughters being married in the temple, and he would sit in the car and wait. And one time, the rain is coming down and he's keeping back his tears. So she decided that she would be married civilly and then wait a year to be sealed so her dad could walk a daughter down the aisle. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. I read her blog post. This was 15 plus years ago, probably. I remember thinking this policy will change in my lifetime because it's not doing what it was intended to do anymore, and it's only hurting families, and it's only hurting people within the United States. It doesn't apply to members outside. And sure enough, a few years ago, the policy was changed. So now you can get married civilly and then the same day get sealed. The 1 year waiting period is no longer there. So yay. That said, you still need to be sealed by authority. Chad and Lori never were. They were married on a beach. They like to pretend that they were sealed because they did proxy sealings inside a temple. But proxy work and it's been explained a little in court, but not all that well. Essentially, the belief is for people who would have wanted these ordinances, or maybe now in the next life have learned about the gospel and now want the ordinances, but you need a body to have done them. You can go to the temple for your ancestors, perform those ordinances in their name, and then they have the option on the other side to accept them. And this is not forcing anyone on the other side to become a member. It's not automatically stamping them as a member. It's giving them the option, the opportunity to say, if you want this ordinance, here you go. You can accept it if you so desire. So Tammy and Chad were doing proxy sealings. You can bring family names, but there are also members of the church who have done a whole bunch of family history work, and they have hundreds of names. They could never do all of the proxy work themselves. They will send those names to a temple, and so the temple will have names on hand that you can do proxy work for. Sealings is just one. I'll talk about some of the others later. I suspect that Chad and Tammy were not doing family names. They were doing names the temple already had, but that when they were then kneeling across the altar and doing proxy sealing marriages for dead people, they believed in their little psychotic brains that Jesus was actually somehow present and sealing them. Not that it really mattered, because in their heads they had been married in previous lives, and if you're married, it's for eternity, so it's okay to have an affair. Like, whatever. I don't know how they use the pretzels of turning things in their brain. It doesn't make sense. But the question does stand. What if Chad and Tammy had actually been sealed in the temple? What happens in the next life with Tammy? Because Chad was sealed to Tammy as well. Now, this is setting aside the idea that Chad has lost any opportunity for exaltation. Pretend for a moment we have a righteous man and a righteous woman who have been sealed. She dies, he marries again, and he's sealed to her again. What happens in the next life? The short answer is we don't know. In fact, I tried to find the actual quote. It was in an old manual, but as I said, the manuals have changed and I couldn't find it. But when I used to teach the adult Sunday school classes, I came across this awesome quote from Russell M. Nelson when he was an apostle. Now he is the prophet president of the church. And he said this before his wife of however many years passed away. And then he did remarry a woman who had never been married before. She'd had a whole career, all of these things. And then he married her and was sealed to her. So now he is sealed to two women. But he said the statement, and again, I could not find it to save my life. But he said, basically, we don't know. We don't know how that's going to work. but we have faith that God is loving and just, and he's not going to cause problems and sadness for people. So here's my opinion. This is Annette's opinion. This is not church whatever. There's a lot we don't know about what sealing means. We do know things like Joseph Smith and many other prophets have talked about the idea of eventually sealings will become a welding link from generation to generation that will unite the entire human race. Okay, that has been said. That's not my opinion. That has been said. So to me, that implies, and this is where my opinion then does come, to me, that implies that the sealing is much different and bigger from what we think of as marriage. That it's, in a sense, getting everybody on the spider web of being able to receive blessings eternally through those sealing lines. If you think, oh, families can be together forever, if I'm sealed to my family, we're together forever, what does that look like? Because my parents were sealed, so am I going to be living my eternity in this giant mansion with my mom and dad? But then I'm sealed to my husband, so I'm with him in my parents' house, or was it his parents' house? And then what about our children who get sealed? And so is this just a massive mansion of sealed couples? Or how does that work? That it's got to be different from what we're picturing and with our little mortal brains. So we don't know what that looks like, but I do believe that personally that it's not polygamy in the sense that we picture it. And I base that somewhat even on when the concept of sealing was first introduced by Joseph Smith. We look back now as like, oh, wasn't that funny? And we had tons of members being randomly sealed to church leaders as if that would grant them the highest of glories in the next life. In fact, some of Joseph Smith's plural wives never lived with him, hardly knew him. It was a spiritual thing of like linking, your star to him and hoping that, oh, if my daughter is sealed to Joseph, then hey, then we get to heaven in the highest glory and whatever. To me, there's more to sealing than we know. Hopefully we'll have more of that revealed, and the pattern on that is that we have leaders who ask the questions in prayer, and if we aren't have leaders asking those specific questions, then we don't get those specific answers. So, and also we have a very conservative organization that moves very slowly. It took till 1978 for the priesthood to be available and temple blessings to be available to everybody. And that was 15 years after the height of the civil rights era. So there has been a lot of progress as far as women in the church, female leadership, female power, all kinds of great things. Some movement a little bit on LGBTQ issues, but it takes a while. And I think in our church too, in order for something a big change like that to happen, you have to have unanimity among the top 15, meaning the 12 apostles, and then the first presidency, which is 3 men. And good luck getting 15 men to agree on massive change if they don't really feel it's from God. Things have to be unanimous, especially if it's something huge. So I don't know that we're going to get answers in the very near future about a lot of issues. But I've seen a lot of change just in the last 10, 15 years that it's lightning fast for such a slow organization. So I have hope. But so essentially, we don't know. We don't know about next lives. It is frustrating to me that a living woman cannot be sealed to multiple dead husbands, but a man can be sealed to multiple dead wives. However, if you have a grandmother or other female ancestor who had multiple husbands, you seal her to all of them, and the idea is it'll be sorted out in the next life. So I personally believe that it will be sorted out. It will look different from what we expect. And there's nothing really to worry about. But as a young wife, I did worry a lot because I didn't like the idea of polygamy in the next life. I don't think that's what's going to happen. Let me show you some of why I believe that. One is that If you look throughout the entire Bible as well as any other LDS scripture, the word abomination is only referred to things that are truly bad. Very like hurting children type bad, like really bad stuff. There is a prophet in the Book of Mormon who says that having more than one wife is an abomination. He says the only time that it's ever okay is if the Lord has to raise up a people, and he says, "You need to raise up seed unto me, then I'll command my people. Otherwise, no, one wife, period." And he calls it an abomination multiple times and says that David and Samuel were sinning against God by having multiple wives and concubines. So until someone can show me a scripture anywhere where something is called an abomination is going to show up in heaven and the highest levels of the celestial kingdom, then I don't believe that polygamy will be there. That's my opinion. Active polygamy is not part of the church at all. That's something that, again, with the whole, it started sort of with Joseph there's a lot of question marks on a lot of things, but it was Brigham Young who really made the whole thing explode. And then it was completely taken off the table. And now if you try to do polygamy of any kind, you'll be excommunicated. And then that's where you get a lot of the splinter groups with the fundamentalist LDS church. That's Warren Jeffs and all of them. They cling to polygamy as a fundamental tenet. And then and you can see how it's caused all kinds of problems, from essaying of young women and girls and basically incest, and then driving out young men from the community because they're competition for all these wives. It's messed up. But we do believe that to get to the highest level of the celestial kingdom, you have to be married. But it's not just for men. I've seen some people say a man must be married, and then hinting that multiple wives gives him more glory. That's what other faiths believe, splinter groups believe. Some of them do. We do not. We believe that a woman is going to be equal and parallel to a husband. She can't be exalted without him, and he can't be exalted without her. So it is. We believe in a heavenly mother. It's one of those things as well. We don't know much about her. So I'm like, leaders, ask the questions so we can get the answers, please. That would be great. I have my own beliefs, but nothing that's official and that I can really share. So. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful a little bit on what the whole sealing situation would be. But yeah, Chad has lost any chance of being sealed to anyone, in my opinion. Not happening. And poor Tammy will find, I'm sure she will not be denied any blessings because her husband is a schmuck. Okay. One thing to note too is that, the idea of families being eternal and being sealed to each other, that if parents are sealed before their children are born, then the children are called born in the covenant. So they're automatically sealed to the parents. If your parents were not sealed when you were born, you can then go to be sealed to them in the temple. That's another thing you can do as proxy. One fun thing is that is the only ordinance where the person receiving it is not, it's not like a yes, I covenant to do this. It's a contingent on faithfulness or anything. It's actually just given. This is a gift to you, which to me, again, kind of feels like all of sealings on some level are helping us all be interconnected as a human family. So this, all rising tide lifts all boats type of situation. As far as other temple work, this is something that Pryor was, at one point he was questioning, I think it was Brandon Boudreaux. And the question started going off the rails a bit, and eventually Pryor admitted, okay, I'm actually just curious. I don't understand this. And then Judge Boyce went, well, since it's not really part of the trial, let's move on. Which is probably the one thing I appreciated about Pryor this time around, that he was genuinely curious about something and not attacking or argumentative. But he kind of makes it sound like he thinks the temple work is baptisms for the dead and then marriages. And then that's what temple work is. And those are two parts. But the vast majority of temple, if you say I'm going to the temple, like Melanie Boudreaux, now Melanie Pulowski, said that she was going to go every day. Generally that means you're doing an endowment session, which isn't the best descriptor either, because when you go to the temple as a youth, you're doing proxy baptisms. When you become an adult, you get to receive your own blessings and ordinances, and you make your own covenants. That's when you receive the garment that people make fun of. Not magic underwear, guys. It's a private reminder of your commitments and covenants that you've made. And no one's making fun of, Jewish prayer shawls. Let's not make fun of other religions' clothing. Let's not do that. But so when you go through to the temple yourself, you receive, there's two parts to the endowment. This is considered the whole thing, you're receiving your endowment. But then when you go for the dead, they split up into, for the sake of practicality and time, the first part takes less time. So people can do, say, 5 to 10 names of dead people on that first part. And then the second part takes much longer, and it's about 2 hours. And you do one name at a time for one person. So when you go to the temple, generally you're in that endowment session which is somewhat educational, but that's where you're making those covenants. And then you have to have received your endowment before you can be sealed and married in the temple. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit. The other thing I wanted to bring up, which I thought was in the testimony, that I was like, oh, heavens to friggin' Betsy. So David Warwick revealed that Chad had told Alex that in one of his past lives, which again we do not believe in, that Alex was an angel who appeared to Nephi when his brothers were beating him. So let me give you some background on that story. So this is early in the Book of Mormon, and again, no mockery. I'm just giving information, believe it or not, whatever. This is just for clarity and context of within the trial. So we have the idea the Book of Mormon opens before the Babylonian captivity, which happens in the Bible. So if you think of Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of them, they were taken off by Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon. So they would have been contemporaries with Nephi and his brothers at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. And so their father Lehi had a vision that said, the city will be destroyed and you need to escape. And so he's trying to tell the people, repent or the city will be destroyed. And then his life is threatened. They want to kill him. So then he's like, we need to get out of here because I'm going to be killed. And then also the city will be destroyed anyway. So the idea is that Lehi and his wife Sariah, they leave and they manage to escape the Babylonian captivity. And eventually they make their way to the Americas. That's a huge nutshell. But while they're in the wilderness, Lehi feels like he's been commanded by God to send his sons back to Jerusalem to obtain the brass plates. Brass plates in the Book of Mormon are scripture, the Jewish scripture from the beginning up to right before the Babylonian captivity that would have been up to their time. And it would include their genealogy, probably the first 5 books of Moses, yada yada, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the idea is you need to go back and get the scriptures, because without the scriptures, your people will dwindle in unbelief and end up in unrighteous, and you need the scriptures. So he sends his sons back. So here's another little tidbit here. At the beginning of the Book of Mormon, Lehi and Sariah have 4 sons. And in age order, they go Laman, Lemuel, Sam, and then Nephi is the youngest. So later in the Book of Mormon, you end up with schisms of people who have broken apart. And so they're named mostly after the oldest and the youngest. You have the Lamanites, who most of the time are the bad guys, and the Nephites, who are most of the time the good guys. But backing up, beginning of the Book of Mormon, the 4 brothers get sent back to Jerusalem, and they dig up their gold and their treasures that they left behind, and they bring them to a leader named Laban. Now, I've heard some people say he was a king. No, he was not. He was a rich dude, a leader of some sort. They try to buy the brass plates off of him, and instead he just takes their money and then threatens to kill them. They try 2 different times, and they end up hiding in a cave. and going, well, now what? We've tried twice and this isn't working. Oh, and we also know that Lehi and Sariah had daughters. We don't know how many. We don't know their names because, of course, men wrote the histories and women didn't matter in their heads apparently sometimes. So yeah. Nephi and his 3 older brothers are sitting in this cave and going, now what? And Laman and Lemuel want to go back to the wilderness to mom and dad and say, look, we tried, we failed. And Nephi's like, no, we got to go get the plates. We have to get the record. And Sam is on Nephi's side here. So Laman and Lemuel, they start beating up Nephi and Sam. And then, again, please no mockery. I'm just making a report here. This is what happens. This is 1 Nephi chapter 3. As they're hiding, so it says that Laman was angry with me and with my father. Also the same with Lemuel. And Lemuel's listening to Laman. And then they smote us, meaning Nephi and Sam, with a rod. And then, behold, an angel, this is verse 29, an angel of the Lord came and stood before them. And he spake unto them, saying, why do you smite your younger brother with a rod? Know ye not that the Lord hath chosen him to be a ruler over you? And this because of your iniquities. So this has echoes of Joseph and his brothers. So that doesn't bode well. Basically, and the angel says you're going to go to Jerusalem again, and the Lord will deliver Laban into your hands. So supposedly, Lori's brother Alex was that angel. Okay, whatever. But it tracks in the sense of Chad telling Alex that he's a protector. But this story also brings up something that we see over and over again in Latter-day Saint true crime situations. Because the way they get the plates, eventually, Nephi goes on his own and he says, I knew not beforehand what I would do. He had no idea, but he's like, God told us to, and I trust that God will find a way. So he goes near Laban's residence and he sees him passed out drunk on the ground in the street. And at that point, and he notices that Laban has his shiny sword on him, and the spirit tells him, you need to kill Laban to get the plates. And Nephi is shocked and horrified and says, I've never killed anyone, and I have no intention of doing that. And is essentially, the spirit constrains him and says, the Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes. And here's the most important part. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. So essentially, Nephi is being told, better to have Laban die than to have you and your family and your entire posterity and an entire society and civilization go without the scriptures and to dwindle and perish in unbelief. The stakes are one man or an entire society. That's what we're looking at. After this, Nephi then obeys. He takes Laban's sword, cuts off his head, puts on his clothes, tricks one of his servants into thinking he is Laban, and then he gets the plates, yada yada. The problem is that a lot of true crime people, from Chad to Lori, in fact, Laban is brought up in one of the texts where they're describing Charles, that is going to be killed, and I believe it was Lori who says, yeah, it's a Laban situation, implying that an evil person was killed. But the problem with this whole thing, that defense, like, well, it's a bad person who had to die. If you look back at the rest of the story of Nephi and the rest of his life, he had plenty of situations where, like, at one point, Laman and Lemuel tie him up and he almost on a ship and he almost dies. There's a time once they get to the New World and they've established their families where Laman's whole group decides to attack Nephi, and there he's like, you know what, we need to leave. So they literally flee for their lives and set up their own city far away. Nephi never again killed someone because they were a bad person. He tried to avoid that. He fled to avoid fighting. There's even an account that happened hundreds of years after Nephi, but in the Book of Mormon, a group of Lamanites who converted and abandoned their own murderous ways, and an army came to kill them, And instead of defending themselves, they knelt in front of their attackers and allowed themselves to be slaughtered. And halfway through the slaughter, their attackers were like, wait, you're not fighting back. Maybe we should stop this. But a lot of people were killed and they didn't mount a defense. Anyway, there's more to the story than that. But the point is that there are many times where bad people are not just randomly killed, and that is not justifiable at all. The only time it was justified was when the stakes were one man versus a society. And yet we have Chad and Lori and many other people in modern times using Laban's murder by Nephi as a defense for their own evil actions. It's the entire point of Laban's murder is that it was okay only because the stakes were so high. He was evil. He had already tried to kill Nephi and his brothers. He had stolen their stuff. And I've actually heard some people arguing that under Jewish law, he had every right to kill Laban because he had tried to kill him and had stolen their stuff. I don't know if that's accurate. But the entire point, though, is that Nephi never again killed someone because they were a bad person or they were in his way. In fact, just the opposite. I mentioned in the whole polygamy conversation the quote from Jacob. That was the prophet who followed Nephi and his little brother. So Nephi had two little brothers who were born after they left Jerusalem in the wilderness. That was Jacob and Joseph. So we end up with 6 brothers total, and the older 2 are the schmucks. Well, actually, there was one last question that was an interesting one too that relates to the whole zombie thing. The question came from Stitchin' Crime and said, and I was actually impressed with this question because a lot of people wouldn't even know this is a thing, but in the Doctrine and Covenants, referring to section 129, instead of chapters, they're sections. Don't know why. That's just the way it's been. But they asked, could Chad have used Doctrine and Covenant section 129 for the demons and zombies? I'm assuming he means to like explain it, or is that where he got the idea from? So section 129, it's funny. It's kind of like, it's almost like the 144,000. It's not something we bring up except sometimes in jokes. It's kind of like this weird, obscure section. It's 9 verses. It is what it is. So here's the gist. The idea is that it explains that there are 2 heavenly type of messengers who could come to you, one being a resurrected angel, and the other type of angel being a ministering angel. And the difference is that one is resurrected and would have an actual body, and the other is just a spirit, doesn't have a body. But then if the devil sends someone to you and tries to deceive you, they might try to look like a good angel. And so how can you tell the difference? And so the suggestion is if you try to shake hands with the messenger, if it's a resurrected being, then you could feel the hand because they have a body. If it's a spiritual angel, they won't try to shake your hand at all because they can't. They won't try to deceive you. They will just give their message. But if it's of the devil, they will try, they'll offer a hand. Oh yes, I'll shake my hand, but you won't be able to feel it because they don't have a body. Because Satan and his minions do not have bodies. So that's the gist of section 129. The idea of this is how you can know if a messenger coming to you is from God or not. But again, I don't think I've ever heard this brought up in a Sunday school thing beyond like, oh, isn't that funny? Did you do that? Shaking hands. I don't think it's ever been brought up in general conference. I'll research that one and double check and get back to you. But I can't remember it ever being brought up in any kind of official situation. I think it's interesting to think that maybe Chad could have used it, but it's not talking about zombies or spirits that are taking over bodies. It's the only negative evil thing would be an evil spirit trying to convince you that it's of a good spirit. So maybe that was a seedling of an idea for him. There's nothing about possessing bodies. There's nothing about casting out spirits. There's nothing about light or dark scales. There's nothing, there really isn't anything about the zombie concept as we've learned about throughout the trials. So this kind of goes back to the Korihor situation, the Korihor phone call. I'll link below in the description to that video when I go through that. When Melanie Gibb called Lori, oh, she says, I've been reading the Book of Mormon, and this reminds me of Korihor, because Korihor, without repeating the whole story, essentially said that he was deceived by a spirit he thought was a good angel. So there's that connection. And perhaps Chad and Lori were deceived by an evil angel, but it doesn't, to me, the section doesn't, it doesn't really apply to the zombie thing. But then again, they took all kinds of weird things and applied them in bizarre ways, so who the heck knows where their brains were? I certainly do not. They are narcissistic sociopaths, period. That's all there is to it. Hopefully that at least gives some context to what they're talking about, and also shows how Chad and Lori's excuses don't fly within LDS faith or doctrine at all. That we condemn them 100%, but we'll be following the trial right up to the bitter end. So as we do so, make sure you got your sweet chocolate to get through it.